All right, everybody, thank you so much for taking your seats. We know that was a really short break. There's a lot more to talk about amongst each other, and actually that's why we're trying to set up this session to be a little bit more conversational, get the audience participating earlier on in the discussion. So keep that in mind as we do our opening remarks. If you have a question, and I'm scanning the room, if you want to put up your hand, and I'll try to find who's got the questions along the way, and then as soon as possible, I'll come to you when we're done with the opening remarks. Now, I don't know if there's anything I could do to raise the volume of my microphone. Can you all hear me? Everything's fine? Okay. Fantastic. So we just heard from the private sector. We're going to hear more from the private sector in this session. Really, the premise of this is the reality that the SDGs, implementing them, integrating them into corporate strategy, it's not necessarily an overnight opportunity. It's a long-term strategy, and that it's a journey. And so over the years that the SDGs are going to be in play, how exactly do companies take the first steps and start to integrate them, but also work collaboratively, work amongst other private sector participants as well as with government? And so we're going to be talking about some of that on the session today. We have two speakers from very different backgrounds, very different lines of business, but there is a common connection. We'll talk about that as we get going through the session. But they're gonna share their experiences from the various stages of their organizational development and attacking issues that relate to the SDGs and how the SDGs have helped to create a common framework and a common set of discussion points. So I'll leave it there just to let everybody know, because I didn't get a chance to. I'm Stephen Donofrio, a senior advisor at Forest Trends Supply Chain Initiative, Washington, D.C. based nonprofit. And we work mostly in my initiative in the field of corporate supply chain and production commitments related to zero deforestation and agricultural commodities of palm oil, pulp and timber, cattle, and soy. And just very briefly, what we find in these types of commitments is that the SDGs are embedded in some way or another. When you look at human rights protection, engagement with smallholders, free and prior informed consent, there's a lot of social elements as well as environmental indicators that relate to the SDGs. So that's going to be the extent of my comments. Who wants to go first? Cindy wants to go first. Tonya says Cindy wants to go first. So go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, sorry, pressing the button. Good morning. Thank you for having me. And as I always like to start, I'm always nervous. So if I feel a tad nervous, I am a tad nervous. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you would, if you have a vowel in your name, you're in charge of rooting for me that I get through this, because it's such an honor to be invited, because I feel a little out of my league, but then I look back at what our company has accomplished, and I realize that I need to sit a little taller in this chair and be very glad for the honor of speaking to you and sharing to you a little bit about our corporation's journey into sustainability and our vision for how to incorporate the SDGs into our plan for growth and securing employment in Central New York. So I am Cindy Bush, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Environmental Health and Safety and Sustainability for a company called Tessie Plastics Corporation. Now, we are a family-owned and operated company that's based out of beautiful Central New York, about 4 hours north of here, and we have two facilities, manufacturing facilities in Shanghai, China. We are a contract manufacturer. That means we don't make a finished product. Customers, and I'm going to use my biggest one who's in the room with me today, Johnson & Johnson. They work closely with us in the design and manufacturing of plastic component parts, which then they assemble and make a finished good. 50% of our business is in consumer products. Some fun facts. We make, every time a doctor picks up the little black tip and looks in your ear with the otoscope, we probably made that. We make surgical component parts for Johnson & Johnson's surgical implements. And we're one of the largest manufacturers of deodorant canister bodies in the world. Fun facts, right? But when you think about being the EHS director in a company such as ours, it's really very exciting because to do this work lines up very closely with my personal values. And so what our EHS initiatives at TESI are really driven by the three reasons that I like to get up and go to work every day and run our corporation this way. One is that we strive every day, and this is one of my top three that I say before I get out of the car in the morning. I say, Cindy, why do you do this work? Number one is to ensure that we as a plastics component injection molder continue to be a trivial contributor to the environment. Two, it is my sole mission every day to prevent injury or harm to our workers and to the community in which we have the privilege of being surrounded by. In the event that injury happens, it's my duty to facilitate recovery and keep our employees financially whole while awaiting return to work. And three is to run our business with the one clear objective that everyone has the right to go home at the end of every day, and that they have a community fit to live in. That is how we, as a small plastics molding company, runs our business. We have seen amazing growth in our company, and I'd like to share with you that it is not a secret to me or probably other people who have heard and know the TESI Plastics story, is that it wasn't always this way. 6 years ago, we had a real wake-up call from one of our large OEMs. May I use your name? Johnson & Johnson. Just a small little company, all right? They reflected 60% of our income, and when we realized that we were not running our business in line with their expectations, for a lot of us, that was could have been a real critical moment. We took that quite seriously. We rose up. As I like to jokingly say, and many of you have heard me say this, we went from zero to hero with them in 5 years and less. 5 years ago, we were told that if they weren't already had business in production with us, they would give us no more. Now, 5 to 6 years later, we are their top leading manufacturer for plastics molding component parts, not only in our cost, diversity, but in our sustainability and our EHS efforts. That's an accomplishment that came with hard work, clear vision, and a determination to secure employment in our beautiful Central New York area. We really are, you hear a lot of people talk about the word responsible, but at the end of the day, it is the one thing that we train and help all our employees understand is our core responsibility is to be a responsible contract manufacturer, to draw the large OEMs of the world to us, keep them, and then be that go-to person that not only can they count on to make cute little plastic component parts, but that we can partner in making sure that it is all done to protect two things. And I really see the SDGs from our business model as a risk mitigation strategy. That's the business part in me, right? Is, how do we look at the mitigating the operational risks and the reputational risks, not only of TESI Plastics Corp., but anyone who does business with us, because we're all in it together, right? So that's my brief, maybe too long, of an introduction on who I am, and I know that Stephen is probably ready to turn it over to Tanya for his introduction.
Yeah, I do want to turn it over just very quickly before I let you off the hook. Can you just quickly, in a couple of sentences, say which SDGs we're talking about as it relates to your business?
Well, when we carefully looked at it, and I'll be honest with you, we're not as far along as I'd like to be, and I actually told EcoVadis, are you sure you want me? I mean, I'm getting into this, but I'm not done yet. But then are we ever done, right? So when we think about Tessie Plastics and our role in the world when it comes to the SDGs, we really see 5 that resonated well with us, but we also have to keep a very keen business eye on what are the goals set by our large customers and how do we come lockstep with them on their path towards sustainable development goal achievement as well. So for all of our large OEMs, the Unilevers and the Johnson & Johnsons that do business with us and the P&Gs, is that number 3, that healthy lives and to promote well-being is very important. Because my duty every day is to make sure we provide the safest workplace possible, whether the business wants it or not, right? I mean, we have to do it no matter what. Number 5 is interesting to Tessie Plastics because if you look at the demographics of who is making our parts and who is out on that production floor day in and day out, it is women. It is short women, tall women, black women, white women. Diversity is on our production floor, but yet we really have to continually look at how do we continually promote and educate and build the lives of the women that are manufacturing our parts. Number 8 resonates with us is that we want to provide a sustained, inclusive, productive employment and decent work. Back to my goal of securing employment. How do we do that really quick, Stephen, is we keep a close eye and track and trending our injury rates because we know that a safer work environment is a more successful business. Over the last 5 years, we've seen our injury and accident rates plummet. Isn't it ironic that it's at the same time period that we put our eyes on sustainability? It's not lost on me, because we've learned that a better workplace leads to better lives. Number 12 is important to us, sustainable consumption and production. We're always looking at, and if maybe later we could follow up on how do we communicate with our staff, but waste reduction. I have some what I call what's in it for me metrics, or meaningful metrics as I like to call them, that help the employees participate in that goal. And then we have very strict rules and control processes on chemicals and how they're used in our industry. And of course, number 13, to really combat aggressively climate change. We have been an active participant in the CDP for several years at the requirement of some of our customers. And it used to be that click the box thing we did. I'm not proud of it, but we've all been there, right? And then something happened along the way. Just to tell you the kind of company we are, we started out with the CDP and looking at climate change 6 years ago. And we got a whopping 78 and an E for our score. Now, the E, as I like to say, was not for effort. But we got started, which is all that really matters in my mind. And now last year, we scored very high, got a 98, an A-, because we got very intentional and we set very aggressive climate change and emission reduction initiative goals that we've already met. And so those are the ones that really work well for us.
Great, thanks. I have some other follow-up questions, but we do want to move on to Tanya and travel over to Nigeria for your perspectives. And again, there is some linkage between the two companies, but we'll talk about that later on. Now for your remarks.
Thank you, Stephen. So very quickly, we're not 120 years old, Gary, but we hope together. That's what sustainability is all about. We're 21 years now. Company was co-founded by myself and 3 others, so I'll be speaking from the part of an entrepreneur who founded a company working in a very difficult environment and starting from a military dictatorship when we first started as businesses into democracy, seeing what democracy is, understanding the changes that have come through, and then going global. And so today we operate out of Geneva, out of Dubai, out of Singapore, across 13 other 13 other African countries, including Nigeria, and also across the value chain within the energy space. So in sub-Saharan Africa, you would find that we're the largest power producers, generator generation company of power, producing well over 2,000 megawatts of power today. We also have the largest distribution network in sub-Saharan Africa, in Lagos. Half of Lagos' population is accessible to us in terms of power distribution. And all of these are things that impact lives directly. Within the space, we're also into hospitality, so we're developing hotels with the Radisson Blu, one of the chains, with Kempinski, another chain, and then high-rise buildings and things like that, so we're also in infrastructure. But having said all of that, and of course, where we started off was within the oil and gas space. But where does the SDG come in and how does it begin to play for us? The minute we came across the SDG and through Paloma's introduction into the SDGs, which first started with Amina Mohammed bringing us into the MDGs and talking about the need for private sector to begin to engage with the United Nations at a time when it wasn't popular at all. But as soon as we saw the SDGs and began to work on it, from a business perspective, it made sense. As soon as we saw it, we knew immediately that it identified for the first time, it picked out things that we were already doing naturally, but we could find a name to place with it. So all of a sudden, you saw that if what you were doing was engaging in alleviating poverty for a long time, then you suddenly saw goal number 1 as something that you could identify with. If you had been employing and creating standards on merit between male and female, and you were not discriminating, and you had that sort of diversity within your organization, then all of a sudden you saw goal number 5 as something you could hold on to. So from a private sector perspective, we could very easily identify what goals we were operating in, and within Sahara, once we looked at it, goals 1 to 8 were very clear to us, but also goals 16 and 17 were goals that were very, very, very important. Now, when you operate within sub-Saharan Africa, a question was raised in MENA about governments. You find out that where we operate, then the governments are very, very, very strong. You cannot operate without having any interaction with government. And so the need to be relevant where governments are concerned and work with regulations and policies and how the SDGs are driven became extremely important, because if the government and the private sector did not speak, and you did not have all players and all sorts of players in the room, then you would not have the kind of regulations and the kind of understanding as to how the SDGs will be implemented. And so we found that there was a big need for us to be in the room to begin to drive the conversation with government as to how the SDGs can be integrated within the system, within budgets, within regulations, and all of that to make it acceptable. And so that's where the private sector advisory group played a huge part. We saw that working at the United Nations level, at the global level, where we had to try and identify what the language between private sector and government was, and understanding that there was this whole trust issue that you had to overcome between the multilateral agencies and private sector here at the UN. That was the first thing that needed to be overcome. And we began to overcome that by having discussions as we're having today in the room. But then we also found out that it did not just end at the global level, that you had exactly the same thing at national levels, at local government levels, where the private sector and the government came into the room, you often found that they were speaking from two sides and they were not collaborating on one goal. And that's where the SDGs began to bring people together, where you could actually sit down and you saw that there were goals that everybody was interested in. The private sector had use for it, the government had use for it, civil society had use for it, academia had use for it. And so in Nigeria, what we did was that we set up a private sector advisory group that had academia, that had civil society, that had the government on board, and had private sector on board. And we began to figure out how we could work with measurement tools so that we can measure what we were doing and have that conversation around board. The presidency inaugurated it, and so far, what we're now doing is that we're creating the matrix that can capture everything that is being done both by the private sector, by civil society, by academia, and by the government, so that we have a more robust reporting tool which then feeds into the national reporting tool that the governments have to then put together, and that's then brought up to the United Nations. And so we're finding very collaborative ways to work. But most importantly, what we've seen is that by driving the argument from the private sector, I think Seth said earlier on, that 80% of what's going to happen will be driven by the private sector. We're seeing that to be true. But it's a conversation that requires that everybody is in the room. But the most important thing is that there's a trust gap that must be bridged. And it's activities like this that begin to bridge that gap, where collaboration is important, where discussions happen, and where we all understand that we're facing a huge target to close 17 goals by year 2030. But it's doable, but it requires everybody to play their part.
Again, I want everybody to feel like they have the opportunity to raise their hand and ask a question, but so I've got two right here. Just a quick follow-up question, and then over to you both. Based on what you said, there's sort of a balance between risk management or benefit identification and driving your involvement in SDGs. Is one outweighing the other? Are they interconnected enough where they're equal?
I think, okay, so I think it's a counterbalance, but one that works very well. We found out that government policies and regulations adversely affect businesses. And so where governments do not understand or do not place the kind of regulations that help businesses thrive, it becomes a problem. So you must engage them, first of all. But you must also engage them in a way, someone also mentioned that a lot of times when private sector pushes forward their arguments, sometimes it comes from a very personal business perspective, what's good for me? And that's where the counterbalance comes in. Now, what the SDG begins to do when you take it into business is that you begin to see it wider than just your business. So all of a sudden, as you're looking at all 17 of them, your mind begins to open up to other areas and how those areas affect you and affect your business either directly or indirectly. Now, when you have those conversations, then it begins to make you more open to listening to other people's opinions and how your business is then worked, or how you push regulations that are wider than just your business. And that's what I've seen happen. In the past, if you went to only the ministry or the agency that affected your business, then you tended to be a lot more narrow about what you're doing. But when you then sat in a room that had to deal with 17 goals, then you're not going to be narrow-minded, because you will then hear other opinions that will help you formulate your strategy as to how you run your business. So I found that this is one of the best tools that has come out, and I know businesses understand it immediately. They see it, they understand it. Now it's how to then take it to the next level, and that's why I believe that we're here.
Great. Thank you, Tonya. First question here, and then second will be there.
Thank you. My name is Hisham Nagar. I represent the CEO of the company for agriculture. Sorry. My name is Hisham Nagar. I represent the company and the CEO of the company Deltex, which is based in Egypt. Have been established for 55 years, basically in the agriculture business. My question would be addressing to the fact that you say that the trust, and I can say the fact that Gary said again, is the gap between government and actually understanding our language as business people. And the level of trust, I mean, we are very small compared to all the stories being here. We're in the footsteps of the very beginning of how to do actually achieve some of the, like gender equality and education. We are addressing government officials like Ministry of Education, which is directly not related to our business, to change the curriculum of vocational training, the schools that are addressing agriculture students. So we're trying to change the curriculum. And to address this, you always have this idea that we have a second hidden agenda. To actually address that point, and especially today, and I had a very interesting discussion yesterday with the head of the UNDP for our region, when he said that in 1992, when we had some private company coming into the UN, it was like we have touched hands with the Satans. So we have to wash our hands before, and private sector actually coming to our premises, something that we could not do. That's in 92. Today, the UN and are actually listening to us. But in some countries, moving from like what you say, a military regime into a non-democratic systems, some countries is still addressing this point is very, very hard. And there's a trust that the private sector actually addressing these points. And it's very hard to build these bridges. I mean, it's really becoming a challenge for us to change government rules and regulations to address, and I can point out the point that Shireen was addressing here, is not, I'm not asking the government to give us incentives to be involved in that development, but what I'm asking you and tell me at that stage, how you make the change and that actually we don't have a hidden agenda. We found that those 17 goals, and we started before, I realized that we started before the 17 goals, and I realized that some of them are actually addressing business issues. Getting the right labor to work for us, getting the right structure, infrastructure that can transport people from one point to the other, transferring our goods from remote areas and having ports that are actually, all of these things, when we work on them, we find that we are actually serving us. But to actually address these points to the government and tell them, we are not here to serve our only business purpose. Yet those business purposes are actually achieving the results you're getting. To get that through, it's very, very hard.
So, and that's a reality across Africa, it's a reality across the Middle East, a reality in many places that I've operated. I found 3 ways of addressing it. The first is that you have to have more private sector minded or private sector individuals that were in the private sector move over into government. That's the first way. So you need to have people across the table on the other side that understand and speak the same language. So it's very important, which means that there must be an active encouragement of people in private sector to move into governments, into places like the UN and all. It's something that we do. I do that personally, and we do it as a company, as a policy to send people into government. It's very necessary because we found that that's important. So it's not just governments. The second aspect of it, we're talking about the civil service, that's one end, and then the political environment is the second end. So you need to drive people into both in the civil service and into the government's politics. Very, very, very necessary if not you're going to have change. The second aspect of it is advocacy. Here it's called lobbying. In other places, it's advocacy. It means that you have to be directly involved across board with people who are decision makers, and your CEOs and high-level officials must have that discussion all the time. A quick example, just last weekend, I was with the acting president in Nigeria, the vice president in Nigeria, and I was talking to him about education and talking about your point on the curriculum. And we're having a very, very in-depth discussion about how to deal with the curriculum and how to deal with digital literacy. Now, it's a conversation that might affects me by the 3rd or 4th person removed because I employ people. But when it comes to the direct impact on Nigeria as a whole, it's a major thing. But we had that discussion thinking about ways to drive it, and that's just advocacy. I wasn't asked to do it, but once the opportunity comes up, do it. So every single time you have an opportunity to push at decision-making level, make sure you do that. That's the second way. Now, the third way is that you must, as a point of principle, understand that your business mentors. In other words, once you do things in the right way, people see it. They may talk against it, but the people who know you and know you within the environment see what you're doing, and then you mentor, and then you bring other people. So when you're doing the right thing, at the end of the day, the truth always comes out. If you're doing what is right, people will see it, they will copy it, they will want to be like you or better than you, and that's good. So those 3 things are important. But everything I've said really ends up becoming about you. Private sector, advocacy, private sector going into governments and businesses, and private sector just doing what is good. Gary mentioned something at the end of the day, that companies who survive are those who really, at the end of the day, do good. You can go out and make all the money in the world, but you would not survive. And that's what I found out. If what you're chasing is just money, you would not be sustainable. So you, at the end of the day, do good.
My name is Ovo Tarigo. I'm the Executive Director of Ideal Initiative, an organization based in Abuja, Nigeria. My question goes to Mr. Atonye. Given the size of your organization and, of course, for the great works you've been doing regarding the SDGs, do you have plans in collaborating with other major stakeholders like business partners who are doing well in business? Do you have plans in collaborating with them to promote the SDGs in Nigeria? And also, you mentioned providing energy as part of what I do know that Sahara does in Nigeria. Do you have plans in investing in renewable energy as well? as part of promoting the SDG? Thank you.
Are there other questions in the room? Take these two here and then over to the third.
Gets read. So, okay. My name is Priska Fleischling, and I represent the International Federation of Social Workers. So, and as you can hear already, I would like to focus on the social aspects of the SDGs. So, I much appreciate to see business sector looking on the SDGs, but when we are hearing what they are talking in the other room, we hear a lot about how they focus on the SDGs. And what I've heard so far is that you mostly do your business and see which SDGs suits you the best, but you have to turn it around. When you have a certain problem, a certain business, you have to involve all SDGs. It's not only choosing those who just are good within your business, all of them have to be included. And the second point is, it's maybe, I might be wrong, but sometimes I think that the business sector looks like a bit linear to like how to make profit, which is okay so far, but maybe you have to, or should be thought about from social protection, social workers' view, that you see it in a holistic view. So when you do business, when you look on impacts, it should also be seen that it has an impact on other groups. So when you start a business or when you build, like when you have water in town, you should also see, okay, people, or especially children, they don't have to go for getting water, so they are at home for another 2 or 3 hours. So they have more time at home. This is an impact. And we have seen so much more of sexual abuse just because they're more at home. Be aware that whatever you're doing, it has an impact not only on this specific topic, but on the whole community. And I really urge you to broaden the horizon, if I may say.
Is it just the question to the panel?
And my question is that how much do you involve this holistic view, and how much do you involve civil society?
Thank you. To your left, gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Charles Bernardi. I work for the Desjardins Group, which is a financial institution based in Canada. My question is, once these initiatives are identified and we have a plan to put them in place, what do you find drives your employees? I mean, we spoke a bit about middle managers earlier, but when we go down to really the employees, what motivates them to support these initiatives and really ensure their success in time?
Great, thank you. And just the third over here, and then we'll answer those questions.
Hi. Daniel Perry from EcoVadis. Just a couple of quick questions. For Cindy, one of the perceived blockers or challenges for US companies wanting to get into supply chain sustainability is that they think that their smaller suppliers are underprepared and that they won't want to participate in sustainability initiatives and don't have the capacity to participate in sustainability initiatives. So any advice you can give from that respect? And then the question to Tanya, it sounds like your company has gone through some pretty significant political changes over the years. It probably makes the North America's political landscape seem like a bit of a joke. So is there any advice that you can give for companies to stay the course, or what they should be doing in terms of communication of their sustainability when there's these dramatic changes in the political landscape?
Cindy, to you first. Any of the questions, I'm assuming the one from the gentleman here would be a good start.
Well, may I start with the gentleman over here? Because I smiled when you asked that question, is how do we engage our employees is critical. some ways that we engage our employees in participating in our SDGs or sustainability goals, or just running our business better. I'll smile when I say this, so don't judge me. One is money. Yeah, I said it. We are blessed to have a profit-sharing program for our employees, where all employees receive the same share of the profits, no matter if you're the janitor or the vice president, every quarter. And it's very important to the income of the industrial worker to receive this extra bonus money. It enhances their life greatly. And so, for example, the way that we engage our employees is that we use a common communication and training style. So the SDGs fit right into it because we use color and pictures to train for recycling, chemical handling. So the SDGs are just another way that we're better communicating and breaking it down to be able to reach all people of educational levels at TESI and how we train them. So they're engaged from the get-go. The other way is we communicate to them how we can't make a lot, we don't contribute to the sales of the company, if you would, but we can save the company money, which we can give back to our employees. For example, last year we sold $584,000 worth of recyclable waste and scrap product, and that went back to the profits of our employees. And that we communicate that with them. We set goals that they can repeat and say easily. For example, waste reduction goal at TESI. You could ask just about anybody, what is the waste reduction goal at TESI Plastics? And I would hope that the housekeeper would tell you we only want to go to a landfill 1 pound of trash per day per employee. Easy to remember, and it's very personal. You know, I live in a world where I say protect the I, but care for the we. And that's kind of when you think about an employee, they're in it to make a living, and they're caring for the we, which is the corporation. And that's how we build our goal setting. We also want to use the SDGs. We use them in line with how we set up our environmental management system. So it isn't a second thing that they have to learn. It's all in line with the policies and the practices. That's just what they're trained from day one and throughout their career here at TESI. So setting meaningful metrics and things that are easily to repeat. Use training styles that are consistent with what you've already been doing, so you're not reinventing the wheel and asking the employees to relearn. And make it meaningful for them personally. And my duty is to make sure that they are financially fit. I mean, I want them to be happy. I want them to be healthy. I want all that. We want that for them, but we know, why do they get up every day and go to work? It's to build their own lives the way they see to want to do them. And so that's how we work very closely with our employees. It's a lot of conversation. And also my team is small but yet mighty, as I like to say. There's only 3 of us, and we have 1.7 million square feet of manufacturing to look after. But we're always out on the floor. We're always talking to people. How's it going? Do you have everything you need? And what can I do for you today? Those are the 3 things we're always out looking for, because we know, as sure as I'm sitting here, if we meet the needs of our employees, our needs of our customers will always be met. And that's kind of how we drive it down to our employees. To your question,
let's come back to
please.
that one. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Let's switch over to Tonya. Maybe to go to the first question that was asked.
Okay, so it's all right. Now, collaboration with other companies and all, I said we'd set up something called the Private Sector Advisory Group, and this would answer the question on civil society as well. And one of the things that we saw when we started thinking about this from a local perspective in Nigeria is that we needed to have all the parties on the table, and not to change what the parties believed in, but have them continue doing what they're doing, but do it in a more collaborative way. In other words, if civil society was there to make sure and check that the bottom of the pyramid was met, then you had somebody at the table who advocated for them, but at the same time made the other party understand why it was important that they must be captured. And then we had academia to capture the matrix. We had big business, private sector companies in different areas where they felt that they had a need and that they could push best to come in and work there. So in that group, we have Unilever, we have GE, we have Siemens, we have Dangote, we have ourselves, there's Oando, there's PwC, one of the members there who's creating the matrix to capture and evaluate everything that is done. So it's a big collaboration of private sector groups. We divided all the SDGs into clusters, and because you would find that people, no matter how much you want to integrate all 17, that there will still be areas where you are more passionate about. And so we created clusters, and we allowed people to fit into the clusters where they felt most passionate about. Some would take one SDG goal, some would take 3. You might fit in 2 clusters or 3 clusters. But because you're passionate about that area, you will drive it. And so we allow them to drive it, we allow them to pick it up, and it's easier for you to collaborate with other people like-minded within clusters or within SDG goals to drive it. And that's the model that we're creating. But at the end of the day, it's also about measuring, it's also about evaluating, and it's also about reporting. So we're capturing all of that. So we have civil society as part of it, we have academia as part of it. But also, where is collaboration most important? A couple of years ago, for example, we had Carter Foundation, who was, it was the Jimmy Carter's Foundation, trying as hard as they could for years to eradicate guinea worm in Nigeria. And they had to work through governments because that was the way that they needed to work. So the money would come, the Ministry of Health would administer it, but it just was not getting to the scale that they needed to do. And so we sat down with them and said, what exactly do you need? It was an area where we could intervene directly. And all they needed for guinea worm eradication was to make sure that the boreholes were put in the places that were hardest hit. And so what we did was we sat down with them, agreed on how much it would take to put the boreholes, identified contractors that we knew would hit the water at the right level, and we began to make sure that the boreholes were put. And within 4 years in Nigeria, guinea worm was eradicated, something that they'd been struggling to do for years. But within 4 years, with a direct participation between ourselves and the Carter Foundation, we eradicated guinea worm. It was done in Nigeria. A year later, guinea worm was eradicated. Then we took exactly that same program to Ghana, and we did exactly the same thing. We did not stop them from doing what they were doing. We didn't stop the ministries of health and environment from doing what they were doing. But what we did was we just ensured that the boreholes were dug in the right place, to the right quality, and in the time that needed to be done. And it eradicated. So there's a lot to go for collaboration. Now, this has nothing to do with our business. It has nothing to do with what we do as a day-to-day business. But we know that health, at the end of the day, affects all of us. And so if I cannot deal with areas that has to do with access to water, clean water, better life, then it comes back to bite us one way or another as an economy. So these are the things that when you start sitting in the SDG forum, you begin to see that there are peripheral things that you might not have thought about directly as affecting you, but they do affect you. And at the end of the day, I don't know that there's any goal there that doesn't affect us one way or another. But some are more passionate than others in some ways, so just follow your passion, and you'll find out that it's easier to actualize.
So we have, as far as I know, 3 minutes left. So I think we'll... That's what happens when you're having fun. Okay, so we're going to try to go back to this question from the gentleman over here to Cindy, but because I think you've talked a little bit to address the woman's question in the back around holistic view and impact on others, talked about the community. So let's talk about the response to this question about disadvantage that suppliers in the U.S. might feel.
Well, when we think about sustainable procurement, one of the hardest things when you're a smaller supplier, we're a tier 1 supplier for large OEMs, and they have some requirements for their suppliers, and they articulate them quite well. And our duty as a supplier is to try to figure out how to take their aspirations and put it into practical day-to-day operations and actions. And what we're doing with our supply base is, because we know what our customers are asking of us as a tier 1 supplier, And one of the key things that we've learned, our lesson, is how to take what's been required of us and then turn around and softly require it of others, of our tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 and tier 3s. I think one of the challenges when we started reaching out to our supplier base, our tier 1 suppliers, was they weren't ready to take on their issues because they didn't know what they were. And so what we decided to do was to model what Johnson & Johnson helped us do, as to share what we learned through that evolution, and are now passing on to our tier 1 suppliers some expectations and goals. But also what we started to do, to your point, is we gave them a tool, as J&J did for us. They gave us the EcoVadis assessment and survey, which has served as a guidepost for the development of our program. I actually at times find myself getting choked up when I think about it, because I really didn't know what I was doing 5 years ago. I told you the truth, right? So, but failing their survey was one of the best things to ever happen to our company. And here's how I know this to be true. The same time that we did not do well on our first EcoVadis survey, we were only 300,000 square feet. We barely had 400 employees, and profit sharing in a quarter was $50. Now we're 1.7 million square feet. We deal with some of the largest OEMs in the world, and we have tripled, if not more, our profitability. All at the same time, which is not lost on all of you, that we kept our eye on the prize. We got real about our responsibilities. We understood how to make and have a less impact on the environment and our world and improve the lives of our employees. So that's what I feel, is that we have to give our suppliers, tier 1 to tier 3s, first we have to give them the tool to get real about their circumstances. If you don't know where you're at, how do you make a map to go where? You got to know where you are first. And I think that what we're doing with our Ethicon Endosurgery J&J tier 1 suppliers is we're starting a pilot where actually we're working with them on, they're doing the same EcoVadis survey we have to do. And from there, what we're doing is supplier mentoring and online collaboration. We don't hesitate to get on a plane or in a car and go work closely with our suppliers, because we know that in this value chain of sustainable procurement, if there's a weak link in that chain, it's going to hurt everyone's operation and everybody's reputation is impacted. And so we've tried to take our lessons learned from our OEM's requirements, and then we're starting to share them down through our supply chain. But I feel that the first, if you want to equip your suppliers, the first step I would say is to help them gauge, measure where they stand, help them get real about their business circumstances, and then partner with them hand in hand to building a corrective plan to get them where they actually, they don't even know it yet, maybe want to be. So that's...
Cindy, that's excellent. I was requested to have 1 minute for Tonya to wrap this up. This is the last set of comments to respond to the question about government.
So there was a very important question about turbulent governments and how to help you. I don't know if I can help you, but but look, one of the things that we found out, and truly we've been through very turbulent governments in more than one country, but we found something to be true. Every government is made up by human beings, so relationships is extremely important. So at the end of the day, you have institutions, you have governments, but at the bottom of it all, you have people. And once you can connect with people, you will survive government changes. That's extremely important. So relationships, we found out, has helped us to overcome every single government change, regardless of what type of uniform they wear, what party they're in, and what temperament you have at the top. The entire body is made up of people. So you need, what we've done is that we've tried to find people in the system who understand the values, who understand what we're doing, who know for the long term. Businesses have to think very, very long term. We have 4-year circles in most African countries and 8-year tenures maximum, but we have to think ahead of that. If we stay in the 4-year circles, we would not be able to survive. So we just look for people who can transcend through those cycles. well, we found that the answer to every institution, to every government, crazy government, friendly government, are people. Find the right people. There will always be right people within the system. Find the right people, build relationships, and just stay the course. Think long term, you will survive.
Great. So we're going to move, I think, directly into the next session. But please join me in thanking Tonye and Cindy.